as I invite you into providing a very warm welcome to our guest speaker, Reverend Glen Swain.
That was quite an introduction. Holy cow. When did all that happen? I don't know. Well, welcome everyone. Y'all look great. Holy cow, look at y'all. I've played here and I've actually talked here before, and it's always great to come up here and bring you love and joy from the Scottsdale Center for Spiritual Living and Reverend Jill. I know your Reverend Kathleen, as Hazel said, is down in Encinitas for the graduation for baby ministers being graduated today, sprouting up over everywhere. And I love the graduation part of it. I believe that singer Leslie Goodwin was here last week, right? She's a dear friend of mine. She actually sang on my CD. And I think Reverend Kathleen is actually hooding her, making her a minister today on the stage of Encinitas. So it's a very, very good thing. More ministers and more practitioners. I was telling Hazel earlier that on graduation, they don't just graduate ministers. They graduate probably 75 to 100 practitioners all around Southern California and Arizona and things of that sort. So anyway, it's a big day for them, so it's a real privilege to be here in Prescott to see everyone. I understand that Reverend Kathleen is going to be talking some about Emma Curtis Hopkins. Anybody know who she is? Anybody know some of your studies? She's really quite a character, quite interesting. And so I think next week she's going to be here throughout this month. She's going to be talking about Emma Curtis Hopkins. Very quickly, she was known as the teacher of teachers. And I think she died in 1925, I believe. She helped start the Christian Science movement, I think with Mary Baker Eddy, and soon went on to go off by herself and just do teaching on her own and writing on her own. And people who knew her, around her, said there was a psychic breeze around her. So when you're walking, when you met her, there was a feeling about her, an air about her that was very, very, very mystical. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, used Emma Curtis Hopkins as a teacher. He studied under her. There's a classic story of our founder, Ernest, who was in New York City in 1924, decided that he wanted to be a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins. And at that time, Ernest had been really all about the law and principle. And he was at a point where he wanted to, he was at the point where it's just expand your metaphysical education, correct? So whenever at that point, always the teacher shows up. And so he was in, in New York City and decides to go see Emma Curtis Hopkins at the old Iroquois Hotel in New York City. So he goes over and contacts her and he knocks on the door. And this stately woman who's 79 at that time opens the door and very, just bows to him like this and greets him in. They go into the parlor, and she proceeds to talk for an hour, right? And Ernest didn't say one thing. So one thing about Emma Curtis Hopkins is that it was really a teacher-student relationship. There was no debate. So whatever Emma said, that's the way it goes. Anyway, so Ernest did this about 4 times, 4 different meetings with Emma, and finally said, wow, I don't think she even knows my name. So he decides to pull a really nice thing. He actually buys a big bouquet of flowers for her, right? He says, she's going to know me, and she's going to know me now. So he actually, for the next time he goes to see her at the Iroquois, knocks on the door. She opens up the door. She bows again, and he does this with the bouquet of flowers, and she takes them, doesn't say a word. She puts them on her piano, grand piano. She says, that would be very nice for a funeral that I will attend tomorrow. Let's get to work. So they started into their student-teacher thing, and but after that they became very, very close friends. I will tell you that when I was in ministerial school, one of the classes that I had, I was assigned to read a book written by Emma Curtis Hopkins called High Mysticism. And when I started reading, I had not a clue what she was talking about. She is so out there that what is this woman talking about? I'm not kidding you. I would read a paragraph or two and not know anything what she's talking about. Then I'd get like a line, and then I still wouldn't know what she's talking about. Now when I pick the book up, I'm hearing more and more, of course. of what she's saying and getting a little bit more of that. And so what she did, one of her more popular teachings was the Bible Interpretations, Series 1. She had many students throughout the years come to her, and she would take different parts of the Bible and interpret them in a metaphysical way. And it was a very, very popular series. And that's one of the parts of the series I want to talk about today is called The Word Made Flesh. And I will say, too, I'm sure that there may still be some who have some energy around the Bible itself. And I did, too. I remember when I was first starting ministerial school, I think I was taking a class called Bible 1. And I didn't have a Bible. We had to go buy one. I had to go to Bookman's, in Phoenix to buy one. And I was like all freaked out about it. I don't know what was going on because I grew up in a Baptist church and went away from that, of course. And I was all freaked out about it. I had to call my prayer partner. We had to pray on the phone. It was just ridiculous. And anyway, so but certainly got over that and really healed anything around the Bible itself. And there was someone I was talking to the other day who was saying something about the Bible. And the best way that I can describe it is a different way of looking at it, as we'll look at it today, is that it is the story of your life. So if you would see the Bible as being every person or every instance, every parable, every story in the Bible as being about you, it's a story of your life, and you can turn that around to what it means to you. So it seems to help some people when they read the Bible or talk about the Bible also. We'll also be talking about the great way shower Jesus today. As we say in New Thought, he was the example, not the exception. And quite a person this person who's cast this shadow over the Christianity in the world for like 2,000 years. So like I said, her first in the series was the Word Made Flesh. And it starts off with John 1 through 18. And basically starts off with, "And the Word was the beginning, and the very Word was with God, and was God itself. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory." So what is meant by this passage? Again, this is the very, very first part of the book of John. Here we have the writer of the book of John saying that he is here, he is a witness to the Son of God that has dwelt among us, and he is Jesus Christ. And that's basically how this opens, and that we are seeing the Son of God in the flesh here right now. Now, to many Christians, sometimes they might think that this is the beginning and ending, that the Son of God is Jesus, and he walked among those at that time in the flesh, and that's the end of the story. But it's very interesting if you read the whole first part of the book of John. The writer gives a detail here that's very interesting that some people kind of slip over, and I'll read it to you. And it says, "The life was in him, and the life is the light of man." So the light was in him, and you could also say, and also in the life of men. So what we're hearing from that is that this Word made flesh that dwelt among us is actually all men, and all women, of course. At that time we're saying men, meaning mankind itself. So it's a very interesting thing to read the Bible and look at a passage and make it really about you. Like I said, it's about your life and what you do. So Emma Curtis Hopkins took this John through 1:18 passage and started to break it down. And she was saying that the writer of the book itself is really bringing you to the, how does she say it? The Mount of God. Bringing to the Mount of God, because the Word is God and God is the Word. So it starts off with that, and then in him was the fullness of God. So what she's saying here is that Jesus is the Word of God, and the Word is Jesus itself. And she's saying that you can actually say the word Jesus and be the Christ yourself, and this is the Word of God. So it's not just Jesus himself. So, and she speaks this is that this is in the same word as in the saint and the criminal at the same time. Saint and criminal at the same time. And she goes on to say, part of the passage is, all things were made by him. So she calls God in this, God is this vastness of principle. Have you ever heard God be called a principle? Have you ever heard that? I had a class here not so long ago. I was teaching the foundation class, and there was one of the students mentioned that, or we're talking about God and mentioned as a principle instead of a big bearded guy in the sky pointing and doing this. Santa God, basically, you doing this, and she had never heard of, never realized that maybe God is about God just being the principle itself. So this is what Emma Curtis Hopkins is saying here. That is like, it is like an idea, a principle that is proven, that is foolproof, that is totality in itself. And it's also this principle that she speaks of, and that the writer of John speaks of, that you can use and use and use over and over again. And it's also a thing where saying that you can use this, not necessarily to create. We really don't create things. We actually discover these things because they're already made in the divine spirit itself, right? So instead of creating, we're actually discovering this and bringing it into Word made flesh here, for us. In him was life. This is another part of the John through 1:18 passage. She says, out of Christ there is no life. And the Word is life whether we know it or not. So what she is meaning here is that when we are outside of ourselves, our Christ-like selves, we really have no life. And again, if a reader is reading the Bible in such a way, they may think that this Christ is meaning Jesus Christ, Jesus the anointed one. And Emma Curtis is saying, when you're out of Christ, your own Christ self, you don't have life at all. And this is what she's saying about the life. She calls it the life light. And she says, this is true whether you know it or not. And to me, what she means by this is saying that you may not believe this or may not think about it, but it is true the way it is. It is a principle. It is a principle. This is who you are. She goes on to say that Christ is the word of truth, that you can speak it anywhere, and that there is no moment when you cannot speak the whole truth of the divine. So you can be Jesus Christ itself. Does that make sense? Does it sound like blasphemy or something? Or you can be this Christ-like self yourself because that's really who you are. There's a passage there. She writes, we talk about the Word and in this discovery of who we are and things that we want. She writes, the Word being spoken, however, is in the midst of external surroundings, compels all externals into submission. It's really important. Let me read it again. The Word being spoken, however, in the midst of external surroundings, compels all externals into submission. So what she's saying here is that the Word, our divine Word, when we speak it and know it with this great conviction, it blacks out all the darkness. It brings light to it. It brings it into submission. Okay? Yes. She gives an example of this speaking of, she said, you may be going through a grief period, and you can say peace in that moment, and know that when you're saying in that moment, you're actually speaking to Christ itself. And peace will reign when you do that. It says that you can be this person, you can be this God-like person when you speak your truth. And how it will certainly make you free. So what has this got to do with you all? Huh? What's this got to do with me and you? And because we're looking at a passage that was written 2,000 years ago. So what does this have to do with you? I think it has to do with everything. It really connects well with science of mind also. In that we teach here that your words, thoughts are things, right? And we change our thinking, we change our life. And this is the way we actually discover things on our own and create, in other words. And that when we use this word with conviction, that we actually bring into the world is made flesh. So a good example would be if you're looking to have a more loving relationships in your life, and you go into meditation, probably visioning with this, And there you are suddenly with very loving relationships. You're with the one you love and loving members of your family. And all of a sudden, the Word has become flesh. Your Word, your Christ Word, has become flesh itself. Another example would be if you want to be healthier, right? So if you speak that the Christ Word for yourself, and speak that you know that your health, every cell is speaking to each other's cell in this perfect, harmonious talk, and all is well, and all organs working perfectly, and you want this divine health. If you speak this word with conviction, this Christ word with conviction and all-knowing, that you will have this health, the word will become flesh itself. A farmer plants something into the ground like a vegetable, and as he tends to it, as we do our thoughts, and soon a vegetable pops out of the ground. That would be the word being made flesh. Okay? I can actually make this personal. Actually, I got, as Hazel said, I did a CD a couple years ago, recorded one, and have them here. But it was a dream of mine for a long time. So through meditation and visioning, I was actually able to record a CD that I'm very, very proud of. And so my word became flesh. You can actually listen to me on the radio. You can listen to me on the CD. So that's a really good example of how the word can be made flesh, and how, again, this Bible passage can actually mean not just Jesus, but it means you too, as far as, creating things in your life itself. So our founder, Ernest Holmes, whenever he was in the Word, he would say, I am in the midst of thee. I'm in the midst of thee. And I love that. He said, whenever we speak the truth, the spirit of life, and we speak it with conviction, any discordant conditions we may have around health or whatever it is, or wanting more better relationships, they all dissolve away. The darkness will go away because this light is shined upon it. Ernest wrote that the word is a mold that decides what form the thought is to take. The word gives form to the formless. How about that? So we're done with a principle here. The word gives form to the formless. This law, this word, it's almost like I like to liken it to one of those cookie cutter things where you're putting in the dough, you're doing the cookie thing like this, and the actual imprint that you have, the mold that you have, is going to create what the mold is, what you're adding to it. So when our word brings form into formless, we are bringing the word into flesh, into our own lives, where we actually physically see it. And, oh yes, I've mentioned this word a few times. Ernest Holmes was big about conviction. You must say it with conviction and this absolute knowing that the word is so. So are we seeing, are you okay with the biblical passage, and he dwelt among us and Jesus, but the actual word itself is the word become flesh in your life itself. And again, I think this really circles back to the Bible and really wonderful stories, and how we can take a passage that maybe looks like something and turns out to be something altogether. I think I have the Unity movement was started by a gentleman, he and his wife, Charles Fillmore. And there is a wonderful book called the Metaphysical Dictionary. Anybody have that? It's a wonderful book. It's about this thick, and it has in it every person, every word, every story, every city, everything that's in the Bible, and its metaphysical meaning. So it's really, really quite interesting to read something that's in the Bible and go to the metaphysical meaning of it, and it takes a whole different meaning for you, right? From the ark and everything else. It's very, very interesting. And Mr. Fillmore wrote about the Word. This spiritual man, or Christ, or the Word, is the true inner self of the individual. Man, therefore, contains within himself the capacities of being, and through his words uses the creative principle of divine mind to create. So Charles Fillmore is saying the same thing. that this words, this Christ within us, that we can make it come flesh with our things that we want in our lives, that we can see and we experience it right here. So the three principles we really want to leave you with today is that first and foremost that the Word made flesh is you. Yes, it was Jesus as stated in the Bible, but it's also you too. You are the flesh. You are the Christ. You're the anointed one. You ever come into a room and say, okay, who's the anointed one here? And everybody raise their hand. That's what should happen. I've done that in classes too, by the way. Okay, who's the anointed one here? Which one? And maybe somebody does this. But what if we were all the anointed one? In many ways we are. Number two, your word brings forth all in your existence. So this is something we should accept and confirm and know that it is made flesh by us, by our word itself, our Christ word itself. And number three, you are the light of the Christ itself. And since Christ is the divine light, so are you. This is something to accept and know and confirm. So I really encourage you to look up Emma Curtis Hopkins, and she's very, very interesting writer and very, very deep. She basically, Emma Curtis Hopkins was a mystic in what she did for her students and what she's done for me and all the other people who've studied her work, is that it has helped the student become more mystical. Ernest Holmes, whenever he started studying with her, Ernest was, again, more about principle and things, but he used to, when he grew up in Maine, he used to take walks in the Maine woods, and he'd have these experiences but really didn't know what they were. And he'd heard the word mysticism. He was a little bit afraid of it because he was a little bit concerned it sounded like the occult. And Emma Curtis Hopkins was the one who turned that around. This was, again, in 1924 and 1926, he wrote the textbook. It was about mysticism and everything. So this is what a great influence Emma Curtis Hopkins was to our founder, Ernest Holmes. So I really encourage you to look up Emma Curtis Hopkins, start reading some of her writings. It's very, very deep. Don't be scared of it like I was. It's okay. There's other writings other than high mysticism you can take on and some of her Bible interpretations, but it's very, very interesting. Now, I think Reverend Kathleen will be talking about Christ in Samaria next week in some of Emma Curtis Hopkins' teachings there. So it's going to be a great series for this June. And this has been kind of an introduction to Emma and who she is and what a wonderful spirit and mystic that she really is and was. Now, it's totally offbeat here. I was speaking to Hazel earlier, and Hazel speaks at different places and things, and I do too. And it's really interesting when you have a prepared talk that it never comes out the way you want it. It's always perfect on paper, then it just kind of goes this way, which is okay because it's going God's way too. And on the way up here, I was listening to Emmylou Harris record, and I heard she was singing I think it's an old primitive Baptist song. That's very, very interesting. And you know what? I'm gonna sing a song a cappella for you, and then we'll go into prayer. How about that? All right. All right. I'll just invite everybody to close their eyes. I'm just gonna. I'm gonna channel Emmylou Harris. Is what I'm gonna do. All right. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Day is a breaking in my soul. Oh, where are our dear fathers? Oh, where are our dear fathers? They are down in the valley of praying. Day is a breaking in my soul. Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? on to heaven a-shouting. Day is a breaking in my soul. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Day is a breaking in my soul. And what a blessing it is to be here on this beautiful Sunday in this Prescott Center for Spiritual Living. Great blessings for all who have come here today in this essentially sacred circle to be in this divine fellowship, to hear this divine word from Emma Curtis Hopkins and the book of John. As known in affirming that this perfection that is God itself, it is this peace and joy and harmony, it is this divine creation, this divine discovery, this essence. Knowing and affirming that it is in each and every person, that in the heart of who I am and everyone here right now, there is this divine lighthouse, this perfect light, as Emma Curtis Hopkins called this life light. It is this perfection of the divine spirit. Knowing this day, I know that the Word is made flesh with each and every person here. If there's any prayers or wants that each and every person here has, that they are becoming Word made flesh right now. For this I give great thanks. I bless the Divine Reverend Kathleen today as she administers to those in Encinitas at the Seaside Center for Spiritual Living and the Love Graduation. What a beautiful thing to have even more ministers, even more practitioners released into the world on this day. So we bless Reverend Kathleen and all there. In this divine knowing that I release this prayer right now into this divine law, and knowing that it's simply done, it is so because I have said it here now. For this I give great thanks and blessings. We affirm this together by saying together, and so it is.